Good evening. It's on or about 7 p.m. Monday evening. This is a regular session of Athens City Council. First thing to do is we will establish a quorum, and all members save one is here, so we have enough to do our voting. Next is the disposition of the minutes of the regular session of council held January 17th, 2023. I'd like to have a motion to approve these.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All right, have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Ayes have it. Communications. We'll start with city council members. Any communications from any city council member? Member Crowell.
Thank you, President Pro Tem Reisner. I would just like to announce that we are in the midst of Ohio Loves Transit Week. We have many of our partners running our transit systems are in Columbus this week, talking to the legislature. And they have arranged for a free fare day this Friday, February 10th, for Athens Public Transit, as well as Athens On Demand. And I believe there's also a discount for the Go Bus. Thank you.
Member Solvay.
Okay, I'm going to follow up on our pedestrian accessibility plan that we presented recently, our committee presented recently. And I just want to remind everyone, city staff as well as city council members, that tomorrow at midnight is the last day to make comments. I want to follow that up by saying that thank you, Alan Swank, for sending your comments. And just as a reminder to everyone, one of the things that we're proposing is that we do a neighborhood or ward 10-year plans for each of the different wards so that it can be individualized. There are some things, of course, that we would like to have across the city, but we want to make sure that we're sensitive to individual interests and needs for each of the wards. So I'm hoping that that will address some of the issues that have come up. Also, I want to thank Paul Weil, former mayor, for sending me a giant packet of stuff about sidewalks. So if you're listening, Paul, I will be looking it over and reading all of it, and I will follow up. And again, thank you very much. So that's it for now, and you can move on. Thank you.
Thank you. Other members? Member Grace.
Thank you. I just want to take this opportunity to share that next, on Monday, February 20th, here in council chambers at 7 p.m., there will be a public hearing. This hearing is to consider recommendations from the Athens City Planning Commission to amend Athens City Zoning Code sections 23.03.1, buildings on public streets, accessory structures, to include accessory energy systems, 230404, B1 neighborhood business zone, and and 230407, B3 general business zone to permit outdoor dining, and that eating and drinking establishments, drive-in, drive-through, must be at least 100 feet from any R1 or R2, and that's a change from 200 feet. And also adding a section on principal renewable energy systems. And this is going to be a part, the introduced first reading ordinances this evening, but there will be a public hearing for public comments specifically on these proposed zoning changes. Again, February 20th, here in council chambers at 7 p.m.
Member Swank.
Did we have, excuse me if I just missed this, did we have discussion of that in committee?
Yes.
Okay.
We can discuss that more. Any auditor, do you have anything?
No report.
Okay. Law director?
No.
Acting Mayor Chris Nicely.
No report.
Safety director? All right. So I think communications are communicated. And so our reports and communications from other elected officials. Good. Okay. Tonight, we have no third readings to pass. We'll have a series of second readings, which I will read, and if there's any comment from the person who is sponsoring the legislation, they'll have a chance. We'll go to first readings, and there will be a suspension of one of those proposed ordinances. So that's how things will proceed tonight. And I should have mentioned at the very beginning that the mayor is absent this evening, so President of Council is acting mayor, and I, as pro tem, as acting president. So first reading of the second reading is ordinance 03-23, an ordinance authorizing unneeded or obsolete municipal personal property to be sold by internet auction, introduced by Councilmember Crowell. Ordinance 04-23, an ordinance amending ordinance 156-22, reallocating revenues from the city income tax and declaring an emergency, introduced by Councilmember Crowell. Ordinance 05-23, an ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director to close streets in the uptown area for special events during the 2023 calendar year and to change requested dates or cancel events as necessary, introduced by Councilmember Reisner. I have nothing to say about it. Ordinance 06-23, an ordinance suspending the enforcement of Athens City Code Title 13, General Offenses, Chapter 13.04, Offenses Against Public Peace, Section 13.04.10, Unnecessary Noise, in designated event areas, introduced by Councilmember Reisner. Ordinance 07-23, an ordinance suspending the enforcement of Athens City Code Chapter 11.04, vending, peddling, and soliciting, to allow vending in designated events areas, introduced by Councilmember Reisner. 08-23, an ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director to suspend temporarily the fee for parking at metered spaces in the municipal parking garage, introduced by Councilmember Reisner. 09-23, an ordinance suspending Athens City Code Section 7.05.03, continuous parking in the same location from Monday, December 17th, 2023, through midnight on Saturday, January 13th, 2024, introduced by Councilmember Reisner. 10-23, an ordinance authorizing the annual purchase of water softening salt for the water treatment plant, introduced by Councilmember McCary. 11-23, an ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into contract for construction of the new fire headquarters, project number 346, and declaring an emergency, introduced by Councilmember McCary. Law Director. I'm sorry, Service Safety Director, sorry.
I do not have my Juris Doctorate yet, so.
I know you're working on it.
I'm sure. On this particular ordinance, as just a reminder to the body, we almost assuredly will be asking you to table this at third reading, and the reason for that is that the final purchase agreement will not be approved by the state. No, it's not the Department, it's the controlling board. I almost said Board of Control, but it's the controlling board, until the 28th of February. And so what that will do is we will have the official approved document that will get attached to the ordinance that is passed on third reading, hence why we asked for the emergency clause, because we will want to award that within the 30-day period that typically would take effect or would be required until the law takes effect, and that's due to that delay. But that's just a little bit of legislative gymnastics to make this function.
Thank you. Other comments? Okay, that takes care of ordinance for second reading. Proceeding on to ordinance for first reading. 12-23, an ordinance declaring a real and present emergency, thus obviating the formal bidding procedure to replace a collapsed storm line located at 30 Current Drive that has formed a sinkhole, project number 360, introduced by Councilmember McCary. Member Grace.
As I am Member Grace, not Member McCary, but as Member McCary is unable to be here this evening, I'm introducing this on his behalf. And it is my understanding that we do need a suspension on this. Is that correct? Okay. So first of all, I would like to make a motion that we suspend the rules due to the emergency nature of the situation on Curran Drive.
Second.
Thank you.
Discussion about suspending the rules? No discussion then, we'll proceed to a vote. All those in favor of suspending the rules, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. Rules are suspended.
Thank
Member
you.
Grace?
So as I'm sure my fellow council members remember, we had a discussion about this in committee, and it's pretty straightforward, as the ordinance states. There was a collapsed storm sewer line at 30 Curran Drive, and because of the depth of where that line is, the repairs are going to be somewhat complicated. It has formed a sinkhole, and it's certainly an emergency situation that needs to be remedied, and the city is wanting to begin that process quickly. This ordinance authorizes the service safety director to expend up to $100,000 from the storm sewer fund for this repair, and because of the emergency situation, the need for a formal bidding procedure is not necessary.
Do we have a motion?
Yes. I would like to make a motion that we adopt ordinance 1223.
Second.
Discussion? Member Swank?
Do you think the 100,000 will do the trick, or is this gonna be like any other project you do at home? You estimate, and once you get behind the wall with plumbing, it's 150,000.
Sure. Thank you, Member Swank. I think it will, and the reason I say that is that we're going to do this work as a combination of both contracted and in-house labor. What needs to occur is pretty straightforward. It's not that we expect there to be a number of unknowns. It's just deep, and you're dealing with a difficult location. So but we know what needs to occur, and so we feel fairly confident that the contracted portion of this that we would have to obviate the bidding process to do will probably maybe over $50,000. Hence why we're asking for that particular clause. But I don't believe it will be over $100,000.
Member Sauvé?
Just real quick, do you have a contractor lined up, or what's that process?
Bonus. The Engineering Public Works Department, I think, has a contractor in mind. I was out last week, in the end of the week, so I've not spoken to them to know for sure exactly who that is. I will get that answer to you probably by noon tomorrow, if by asking the folks down at EPW.
Thank you.
Is there somebody you'd suggest?
No. No, I just wondered if there was like a process, like you have, these are the guys we usually use, so call them, and if they're too busy,
In
we'll call
almost
the other
all
guy.
cases, it's somebody in the relative local area that we can count on in a situation that is like this, where we trust. And the reason I say that is number one, there's not that many people who can do work this deep. But the flip side of that is you typically don't want to go too far away to grab somebody that is an unknown. All of our local contractors, expect to get work from the city of Athens in the future. So, they'll tend to be, very fair with us when we ask them for an emergency response. And so that's typically how we approach it.
Thank you.
Anything else? Well, then moving right along. Ordinance 13 dash,
Do we need a vote?
oh, I'm sorry. We haven't voted yet, have we? A motion, a second?
We have that.
Yes, okay.
We just need the vote.
Oh, we need a vote. Well, let's vote. All those in favor of passing 1223, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Ayes have it. Okay. 13-23, an ordinance amending the 2023 appropriation ordinance 155-22 and amending ordinance 126-22, authorizing an increased expenditure in construction and construction engineering for the water treatment plant salt storage roof slab and beam replacement project number 354, introduced by Councilmember McCary. Member Grace, want to speak to this?
Yes, so this is another item that was discussed in committee, and this one does not need a suspension this evening. But we authorized an expenditure of $365,000 previously for the salt slab, or salt storage roof slab project. And this is one of those projects, Member Swank mentioned, where once we got into the project, there was further work that needed to be done, and it is certainly better to make these repairs while this project is already in progress. And so this ordinance is to increase the authorization for this project to $425,000.
Discussion? Anyone? Okay. 14-23. An ordinance amending the 2023 appropriation ordinance 155-22 and amending ordinance 89-22, authorizing an increased expenditure for the West Washington Sidewalk and Safety Improvement Project number 335, introduced by Councilmember Reisner. So I will speak to it and allow me to read the ordinance for the first time. Section 1, the 2023 Appropriation Ordinance 155-22 is hereby amended by appropriating from the unappropriated balance the sum of $70,000 to Street Fund 220 TC 500 and increasing the total appropriations by said amount. Section 2. Section 3 of Ordinance 89-22 is hereby amended to read as follows. Section 3. The Service Safety Director is hereby authorized to expend up to, and this has been taken out, $150,000 and replaced by $220,000 as follows. $130,000 from CDBG Fund 248 TC 500, and this has been modified, $20,000 has been struck out, replaced with $90,000 from Street Fund 220 TC 500 for project number 335. Any discussion? Member Swank?
I drove down by there today, and if I recall from the last meeting when we had the committee meeting, we talked about this, and the Sidewalk and Pedestrian Committee. The reason the cost went up is twofold, I believe. One, we're gonna finish that sidewalk on the side of the street opposite the cider house, where there's a big area where there is a sidewalk. And then we're gonna continue, make a right off of West Washington and head up Schaefer Street. Are we gonna replace all of those bricks? There's an extensive area of bricks that are like a amusement park roller coaster there, across from Stu Mac. Are we gonna be replacing those with traditional concrete sidewalk?
Member Swank, thank you for the question. Given that that's the most talked about, complained about sidewalk that I've heard since probably the last 10 years, yes, we are going to.
Okay. Money well spent.
That's, basically, this project is, we got a good price on sidewalk, and so we're trying to take advantage of the fact we got a good price from a good contractor here and expanding the scope of the project. I mean, that's frankly what we're doing. We understand from the work of the ad hoc committee and this body that sidewalks are important. Here we have an opportunity that we can expand the scope and kind of snatch some low-hanging fruit, specifically that one that you're talking about. So we're going to do it.
Just.
Member
real-
Solvay?
Thank you. So,
Well, you're going to speak anyway, so I thought I'd just slip that in.
someday I'll get you to pronounce my last name correctly.
I know, but don't count on it.
Don't count on it, okay. Anyway, so does that the sidewalk continue all the way where the tracks used to be and over to, all the way to West Union, or is it just across from Stumac? I'm sorry to be picky, but I know people there. It's my ward.
Sure. I'll double check the exact extent of the scope, and I'll give that to you by tomorrow. I do know that where we are going to stop as you go south from West Washington is where we are going to pick up with the West Union Street project. So between the two projects, that all of the repairs to that particular stretch of sidewalk between West Washington and West Union will be completed as well. I just don't know which project is doing how much of that section. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure, that makes sense. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Any other discussion? Okay, let's move on to 15-23, an ordinance amending the 2023 appropriation ordinance and authorizing the auditor to make interfund transfers introduced by Councilmember Crowe.
Thank you, President Pro Tem Reisner. As discussed at committee on January 23rd, we have a number of items in this ordinance, appropriations, fund transfers, and some corrections to the 2023 budget, and I'll just go through these. We'll start with the appropriations. There's $1,200 to the general fund to the auditor's office. This is for a computer tower, which is used for their check scanner, which is used on a daily basis. There are two separate appropriations for the courts. There's $900 to the general fund for professional services. There's also $9,000 to the DUI fund for incentives and supplies. I'll go ahead and do all the appropriations and then see if there are any comments on any of these. We have an appropriation for a Ohio Recycles grant that the Assistant Service Safety Director wrote in 2022 and received for the city of Athens, and we are now executing this grant. So there are two items appropriated here. There is $1,920 associated with this grant for professional services, and then $3,504 for purchasing equipment for this grant that we received. This is a litter grant, so this is equipment to keep an eye for our EPW environmental coordinator, to keep an eye on our dumpsters. I believe a particular area that's seen some problems with some camera and mounting and software. We also have $173,000 appropriated to the sewer debt fund for paying our loans. Are there any questions on the appropriations section of this ordinance? Yes, Councilmember Spielness.
Thank you. See, it can be done. I guess I'm curious about when they say professional services. That seems so, to me anyway, like, what does that mean? I mean, I think it's fair to ask what professional services we're talking about. So can we learn more about that?
For the Ohio Recycles grant?
Well, there's several professional services, $900 for the general fund, $1,900 something to use for recycles grant for professional services. Well, that's a little bit more, clear, but yeah, I just,
Right.
curious.
The Ohio Recycles grant professional services, I believe, is related to setting up the software and being able to use the hardware that they are purchasing. The $900 for the court professional services, I tried to get a little more information on that and I was unsuccessful. I don't know if anybody has any additional information.
I don't remember,
Not at this time.
but I can talk about professional services. That's when we basically pay someone to do something for us.
Yeah.
So whatever is related to we pay attorneys, we pay people who fix our sidewalks, anybody that we hire in a professional, manner to do the services for us, for whatever we're working on, is we pay under professional services.
Yeah, I understand that from a general perspective, but I'm curious about what $900 is going for professional services for the court. I think that's,
It's a good question and I'll try to get more
I'm
information on that
I'm just
for
curious, like, what do they need?
the next reading. I'll get more information on that.
They pay those a lot, and this is probably to do with some outside services to deal with counseling, mental health assistance, and things like that. So they have contracts with health recovery services and things like that. So they have several reasons to use professional services in the
Okay.
court.
I'm on the grand jury right now, so like,
Acting Mayor? You have-
I just wanted to add that any of these appropriation ordinances that come through, while the auditor might not have the literal notes right in front of her, she has reviewed every, and I know you have a question about it, we don't have an answer right here, but she has reviewed every ordinance before it comes before us. And she is very strict about taking a look at it, as is her deputy auditor. And if there's a question, I know I've seen the emails back and forth where they say, what's it for, what's the question about, so.
and I appreciate that.
I have this and can send it out tomorrow. I feel like I just read it today, but there were so many things on here and so many emails that it's just,
Sure.
I can't bring it up in my head right now.
Okay, thank you, Kim.
Member Swank?
Well, while we're talking about terms, incentives. What are incentives?
I have an answer on that because I reviewed the monthly credit cards and I had the same question myself. And I think in this particular instance, the grant allowed incentives in the form of small gift cards for the people who are participating in the program. So I saw all the charges come through on the credit card. By law, we need to review that every month, and so I asked about it. That's how I learned about it.
And these small gift cards would be to where?
The people participating in the program, in the grant program.
So payment to them as a.
For,
for
no,
participants.
for gas, groceries, clothing, different things that they might
I mean,
need.
they
I guess what I'm asking, is it a cash gift card or is it a gift card, I'm just gonna use an example, to Bob Evans?
I think it's a cash gift card as I remember it coming through.
Well,
On the
like-
credit, on the.
The question here about professional services, I'd like a little more detail, whether it's been reviewed or not. Because if we're giving it to businesses, I'm hoping we're giving it to local businesses. In other words, redeemable at a local business as opposed to, Amazon.
These are grant funds, and they're regulated by the state,
That's
whoever
fine,
gives
but it would
them.
be nice to know the
Yeah,
detail.
yeah.
Well, I don't think if you don't like what they're using them for, we can say no anyway.
Well, you can't say yes or no if you don't know what it is. So, as Sylvia said, I would like a little more detail on both of these. We're talking about taxpayers' funds. And I think they would like to know.
Well, these aren't taxpayer dollars that are coming through our city. These are coming from state grants that we have no control over.
True, but we are using.
The city as a city, we don't buy credit cards for people.
No, I understand that, I understand.
But the court is allowed to because of their grant, and that money is a grant and doesn't come from our taxpayers.
Right, I understand, but I do think the viewers at home would like to know what some of this is going towards.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Yes,
I just want to say that while I don't know what the gift cards are specifically to, but one thing to keep in mind is while it is absolutely valuable to support local businesses with gift cards like that, sometimes programs may specify that it is to, for a participant in a program to like to a grocery store or for fuel, to meet sort of basic needs. And so I would guess that those are the types of gift cards that are being distributed for participation in a court program, is either for food or fuel.
thank you, Member Grace. Other questions on appropriations tonight? Moving on to the next item on this ordinance, Section 2. This is to correct some amounts in our 2023 budget as described at committee. We just had some things in the wrong line. So I'll go ahead and read this. The 2023 appropriation ordinance, which was 15522, is amended by decreasing and or increasing the following sums. Decreasing Cemetery Fund 210, transaction code 600, transfers and refunds by $34,220. And increasing Cemetery Fund transaction class 200 and 300, supplies and services by $14,920. And transaction code 500 by $17,800. This is just to correct the 2023 budget lines. And of course, decreasing and increasing the total appropriations by said amounts. Any questions on the cemetery budget line correction? Moving on to the last section of this ordinance. Interfund transfers. The auditor is hereby authorized to make the following interfund transfers. The aforementioned $80,000 from the general fund to the cemetery fund. And then we are paying our general fund back from the parking garage fund, which in a sense borrowed $5,000 from the general fund. So we're paying that back from the parking garage fund to the general fund. And then a couple of debt issues, $160,000 from the parking garage fund to the parking garage debt fund, so we can pay our bills, as well as from the water fund to the water debt fund in the amount of $400,000. Are there any questions about the interfund transfers? Thank you, President Pro Tem Reisner. That completes 01523.
Thank you, Member Kraut. We'll move on to 16-23, an ordinance amending Athens City Zoning Code, Title 23, Chapter 23.03, General Regulations and Permitted Modifications, Section 23.03.10, 23.03.11, and adding Section 23.03.12, introduced by Councilmember Grace.
Thank you, Member Reisner. And this is one of the ordinances that I mentioned earlier in the announcement about the public hearing. And I would just like to remind everyone that the process by which these ordinances came to council, and that is in the first whereas, whereas on October 6, 2022, the Athens City Planning Commission voted to recommend said changes to the zoning code. And so when the Planning Commission recommends changes to the zoning code, and then those come to council in the form of ordinances that we discussed in committee, and then as well as a committee discussion and 3 readings in council, there's also a public hearing specifically for an opportunity for public comment and further exploration of these changes to the zoning code. So this is the first of 3 ordinances that deal with changes to the zoning code. And this one specifically addresses, it's a 7-page ordinance, so I'm not going to read the full ordinance, but it addresses sections 230310, which is about number of buildings that are restrictions regarding the number of buildings on a lot, and accessory structures, and regulations and permitted modifications, and principal renewable energy systems. And the brief summary of what this ordinance does in terms of changes to our zoning code is it allows for accessory buildings that are actually accessory energy systems. For example, a solar panel. And these could be a roof mounted or an independently mounted array of solar panels. And this is in line with our priorities here in the city of Athens to encourage ecologically sound energy production, and it also by adopting this, it would make it easier for homeowners and residents to have solar on their own property. This also addresses geothermal heating and cooling, and wind powered, and defines principal renewable energy systems. So there is quite a bit, and there's quite a bit that is fairly technical, but I have those are the general parameters of this. And this does not address dwelling units, which I know is something that is frequently thought of when we talk about accessory structures, because this is an ordinance specifically to address accessory energy systems on a property.
That's it?
That's it from me for now.
Discussion?
Just one quick question.
Member Swank?
One of the areas where ground-mounted solar is not permitted is in the, I'm not exactly sure of the title, the historical area. Did I read that correctly? Sorry?
Yeah, the historical overlay district.
Right.
Yes.
So someone who buys a house there or has a house there cannot, as this is written, could not take advantage of the ground-mounted solar.
Correct.
And
Right.
the background or reasoning for that is?
I'm guessing it has to do with the restrictions of a historical overlay, but I will defer to our service safety director.
You can always seek a variance, and I have to go back to that specific provision, because we did talk about that in planning commission, and I believe we discussed, having a situation where someone were looking to do something different, just like they would a roof-mounted solar in a historic overlay zone, to go to the Historic Preservation Commission. But I think they can get a variance through the BZA, assuming that it would work with the, but like I said, I don't want to speak out of hand here, I probably ought to double check.
So the current regulations are local regulations as opposed to state or federal?
Correct,
Okay.
this is all zoning, so this is
Okay.
all
This is-
local law.
All right.
Yeah, City of Athens
Yeah.
specific.
Member Crowe?
I don't have a comment on that. I have a point of order question for you, President Pro Tem Reisner.
Okay.
May I speak on a previous ordinance that we've already completed?
Parliamentarian?
The appropriation ordinance. There were some questions that came up, and I put a very good response from the auditor's office in the wrong folder, and now I found it, and I can provide more information. It's okay if we
Well,
can't.
So, let's see, that was a first reading. And it'd probably be more appropriate if you bring it up next week at
No
the
problem.
second reading.
I can also email people.
That would be
There's that.
helpful also.
Member
Apologies to the auditor's
Spielness.
office.
Great, okay, so, I just want, as, I think some of the people out here might live in a place where there's a homeowners association with some bylaws and rules, like me, and, is my understanding, I'm gonna defer to our law director here about this, because we had a conversation about it, and it's my understanding that, the homeowners association can make decisions to say you can't do solar, and that overrides. Am I correct on this?
You have a private agreement, you have a contract with your homeowners association.
Right, right. So for those of you out there in that situation, you need to change your homeowners association rules if you can, if you do want to have solar and it's being prevented now. Is that fair to say?
That would be fair.
All right, thank you.
I guess we're done with that. We'll move on to 17-23
Did you want to ask if there are any comments from the public?
on this issue.
Yeah, on the ordinance.
Oh, okay.
There's some hopeful looking faces in the audience.
Well, she was so busy knitting, I wasn't quite sure that she really wanted to
I think-
participate. You might have been Miss Marple at a trial.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm Amy Delac of 124 Morris Avenue. I am the chair of the City of Athens Sustainability and Environment Commission. The commission has not weighed this ordinance formally, but I want to say personally that I'm really excited about the opportunity for the city to further encourage and to reduce barriers to having solar on your property. I think it's a great idea. I'm planning to inform the commission members about the public hearing coming up, and hopefully you'll hear from more than just me on that. And I do know, just from other cities have grappled with the historic overlay district issue and solar. Often in solar codes, they will say something like, you can have solar as a by right use in a historic district if it's not facing the street or if it's not visible from the street. So that might be, I know for particularly Portland, Oregon, because they have a lot of historic buildings and they have a lot of people who want solar, that might be a good model to look for to make sure that your language is maximally allowing and encouraging solar while also preserving historic character. And I do believe this ordinance get us to Soul Smart Gold, which is a designation that is would be really great for us to have. So thank you very much for taking this up.
Anyone else from the audience care to speak on this? Once, twice? Sold. Okay. Member Swank? I knew it.
No, I just got to thinking about something, and I would agree with what the speaker just said wholeheartedly. And this is a very important issue for the city of Athens. Unfortunately, we're going to have a hearing on what I would consider a bad day for most people. And the reason I would consider it a bad day for most people, it's a federal holiday. Granted, it's not a city holiday, but it's a federal holiday. Schools are not in session. We don't get any mail. I'm not sure if the trash gets backed up a day or not, but many people are going to think, council didn't meet on Martin Luther King Day. Council doesn't meet on Memorial Day. Council doesn't meet on Labor Day. They're not meeting on President's Day. And I'm wondering if we might schedule this hearing at a normal day in most people's schedules.
It would take 30 days if we have to.
Yeah. So like, for example, the first business meeting in March.
I
Because
believe,
quite honestly, I'm looking at my calendar, oh, crap, we got a meeting on President's Day, and I was planning on not being in town because it's a 3-day weekend.
I believe these have to be published at least 30 days in
That's what-
advance.
That's what Debbie said, yeah.
For the public hearing, so we would not be able to hold it for the first meeting in March. And one reason that we're wanting to go ahead and get this in place is because there are significant tax incentives that I think might encourage folks to take part in this.
Well,
But
yeah.
I understand your point.
And as I do yours, I just look back at this, and this first came to council on October 24th, November, December, January, 4 months ago. So I really don't think another month would kill us. Just trying to involve as much of the public as possible, and we may put it off a month and nobody still shows up, but I'd like to have the opportunity for many people who would like to chime in as
The
possible.
other thing I would say is that folks can always comment at the first, second, or third readings. So it doesn't have to be during the public hearing. And so that would be another opportunity.
Any other discussion? Okay. 17-23, an ordinance amending certain sections, the Athens City Zoning Code, Title 23, Chapter 23.04, permitted uses, and sections 23.04.04, A1, B1 Neighborhood Business Zone, and 23.04.07, 1 and 3, B3 General Business Zone, introduced by Councilmember Grace.
Thank you, President Pro Tem Reisner. And this ordinance is significantly shorter than the previous one, but is following the same procedure in that on October 6th, the Planning Commission voted to recommend these changes to our local zoning code. And these changes are related to two different business zones. So the B1 business zone, the only change in that is that under general conditions, where it states that business operates, all businesses, services, or processing shall be conducted wholly within a completely enclosed building. The language to state outdoor dining shall be permitted is being added. And the same is true for the B3, general business zone. Oh, B1, by the way, is neighborhood business zone. B3 is the general business zone. And we have that same change to include that outdoor dining shall be permitted in the B3 zone. but also in B3 that eating and drinking establishments that have drive-ins or drive-throughs shall have the drive-in or drive-through at least 100 feet from any R1 or R2 zone. And it, previously stated 200 feet. Those are the changes that are included in this ordinance.
Any discussion? Member Sway?
Couple of clarifications. Is a food truck considered a completely enclosed building? And there could be two types of food trucks. There could be the one that can move and the one that, well, three types of food trucks. The one that can move on its own, the one that can be towed, or one that is a permanent structure. In other words, they took the wheels off. Is that considered a enclosed building? An enclosed building? I don't know.
I can speak briefly to how we've interpreted food trucks so far, given that they're a relatively, recent, more prolific phenomenon than historically. Ones that have the wheels taken off are functionally a building, and so we've treated those like a building or like a portion of the lot from a zoning perspective. Ones that can move, we've not considered as a portion of the lot from a building perspective. So I think what you're getting at is, and correct me if I'm putting words in your mouth, but if there is a food truck that is parking on a lot that is getting a peddler's permit, but then having a private agreement with a private entity to put that mobile food truck on a lot, does it need a zoning permit from the owner of the lot that is in compliance with these provisions to operate? And we have never interpreted as such. And so, we basically have interpreted as establishments being something that's stuck to the ground as opposed to something that drives around. And I don't know if there's any further, enlightenment that the law director would have on that.
No, I think that's the interpretation that the code office has made in the past.
Second question revolves around number 3 and the last one. Eating and drinking establishments provided at restaurants with drive-ins and drive-throughs have the drive-in, drive-through at least 100 feet from the R1 or R2 zone. When we do the measurement, is the measurement from the property line of that establishment to the R1 or R2 zone? Is it from the place you order? Let's just use Sonic as an example. Is it from the place you pull up to at the Sonic and speak into the speaker? Or is it around the corner where you actually pick up your food? So which of those three? And maybe Kentucky Fried would be a better one, because Kentucky Fried butts up against an R1 zone there on Morris Avenue.
Right.
Is it from the back of Bill's lot, which butts up against R1, or is it from where you order or where you pick up?
Currently, it's from the building. And that's how this reads, the portion that's being struck out, the principal building from the R1 zone. The way that is being revised and what the commission voted on and the recommendation to revise, it would be from the drive-through. So in that instance, and what we generally understand the reason for this historic prohibition to be here is because of the squawk box, right? Making noise when someone comes through and goes, "What would you like to order, please?" And it's loud. That's really the point that with this revision that we will measure from. As it stands now, under the current law, it's from the building, and what we've done is taken from the side of the building that is, whatever that distance is to the zone that is the abutting zone. To your point about Kentucky Fried Chicken, I believe it's under the savings clause, which basically is grandfathering.
Right.
So it would be a grandfathered establishment.
Yeah, and I wasn't picking on Bill's spot, I was just using that as an example.
Right,
We
it's
can
a
all relate to.
perfect example of something that under the current code would be prohibited. Under this new code, we'd have to go back and remeasure as to where that box is versus where the zone is. It probably would still be prohibited. Insofar as, but like I said, under the savings clause, seats allowed.
So in this, do we need to define from the box, because it doesn't really say that in this ordinance? At what point?
I think that certainly puts a finer point on it. The way, I will tell you, as long as I'm service station director, we'll interpret it from the speaker. But then again, that doesn't govern the next person.
And then I guess the final thing, and I received this from the email from a constituent today, why the change from 200 feet to 100 feet?
We found this to be a pretty significant barrier to businesses attempting to do, to make their business. This is a business-friendly change. A perfect example is Kaiser's. Kaiser's, at their new location, has gone through all kinds of challenges to get themselves opened. And one additional challenge that they had to go through was going before the BZA because of the drive-through, because of the existing language provisions about drive-throughs. So we saw it as something to promote business, and we didn't think it was so unacceptable with this change that it would be a problem for the R1 and R2 zones, and we thought it would be something that would allow for a little bit more flexibility for business owners.
Because the comments I got are places that bordered this and would now be affected if something came in, particularly those along East State Street because of the crazy zoning that we have there. It may not be there now, but this would allow it to be closer than it ever could have been.
Sure. I mean, I suppose it could. I would say that I think drive-throughs are getting better as far as the just the angling of the speakers, the loudness of the speakers. Many people order on this and then just drive up and pick it up versus actually talking to the person on the drive-through. So I think it's a less objectionable use or use of property than maybe in the 1980s or 1970, whenever this code was originally written.
Other comments? Audience? Okay. 18-23, an ordinance amending Athens City Zoning Code, Title 23, Chapter 23.06, Administration and Board of Zoning Appeals, Section 23.06.02, Certificates and Permits, introduced by Councilmember Grace.
Thank you, President Pro Tem Reisner. And this is ordinance number 3. That is, again, a part of changes to our zoning code that were voted on by the Athens City Planning Commission. And this one is specifically dealing with the administration and Board of Zoning Appeals. We have a change in paragraph A of 230602 to make the language gender neutral. And then we have a few paragraphs that are being struck from this section of zoning code. And this is the section that it deals with certificates and permits. And we have been asked to strike the paragraph related to certificate of health officer, occupancy permits, and excavating permit are the 3 sections that are being struck. And then under filing plans, which was previously paragraph F and would now be paragraph C, the language that says permits without the above information shall be considered incomplete. And filing plans details all of the information that needs to accompany an application for a zoning permit. And this language just clarifies that if they don't have all of that information, then the application is incomplete. Paragraph D is, again, changes for gender neutral language, and those are the changes included in this ordinance.
Discussion? Member Crowe.
Thank you, Member Grace, for your close look at these, and I appreciate the non-gendered language. There's one more in new section D, the last sentence, writing of his.
Yes, thank you, Member Crowell.
You're welcome. Thank you. No other comments. Thank you.
Sharp eyes. Yes. Member Solveig Spielness.
Thank you, President Pro Tem Reisner. Okay, I would like to get a clarification of why we need to get rid of B, C, and E. Why are those no longer important? Or why don't we want them?
So I'm going to ask the Service Safety Director for specifications, but I know that some of these are provided by other entities, rather than being provided by what's this, your additional title? There's the zoning, as Service Safety Director, you also have another title that's not listed, but the zoning administrator.
The person in charge of everything that people are angry about.
Right, yeah, the unofficial title, but, yeah.
I can speak to this. Thank you for the question. So first of all, there's no health officer in the city staffing ordinance. This is a very old section of code, basically, and since this code has been written, there's been changes to the way that the city does things. So there's no health officer. The health department will act when they need to act through their authority granted under the ORC. Similarly, with the occupancy permit for commercial structures, that's the State Department of Commerce will grant occupancy permits. We do have authority through the fire chief to prohibit occupancy in certain situations if there's a situation where we deem it not to be appropriate due to life safety. He can basically act and keep the occupancy permit from the Department of Commerce from being issued. And then lastly, the excavation permit. Since this code was written, we've enacted a couple other provisions of code that allow us to govern excavation. One is the Land Development Code, which is Title 27, which is relatively extensive as far as how we'll deal with excavation and impact from excavation and such. The other is 5.07, which is the Stormwater Pollution Prevention provisions, which talk about ultimately dealing with exposed soil that could be eroded in situations where there are heavy rain. So we thought that this was a kind of an extraneous permit that really is not necessary given the authorities granted under 5.07 and Title 27 land development.
Okay, thank you. But just to put a little finer point on it, so to understand how this works. So if building is being put up, occupancy permit is essentially, because the other ones make sense to me, although I'm hoping that clearly that's covered by other entities. But for the occupancy permit, you're saying the fire department can make a decision about that? Is that, did I understand that
It can
correctly?
restrict so the fire chief can cause, and I'll have to get to the specific provisions within like a State Department of Commerce issuance of an occupancy permit, but the local fire chief has a say in whether or not he's able to provide life-saving capability to a structure, and he could go and restrict occupancy because he's granted pretty wide authority under the Ohio Revised Code with that, or he or she, or they. That was our thinking there with occupancy permit.
Yeah, I'm sorry to press this, but if we someday have a building inspection part of code enforcement and all that, that's normally a part of that is an occupancy permit. I mean, I've built a home before and we had to have an occupancy permit. So that sort of threw me, like, doesn't somebody have to check that it's okay before it's being used?
Well, and that's a good point. I mean, we do not have a building department in the city of Athens, and so we defer to the state of Ohio on building code enforcement. We're not staffed for that. We've never acted for that. There's been I think a deliberate effort among historic administrations and councils to steer away from having a building department and allowing the state to do that work. So certainly if we were to have a building department, yeah, we would have an occupancy permit as part of our operation.
We can talk about that another time.
Yeah, it's a big goal of mine. It absolutely is. It's a heavy lift. It's a heavy lift that's gonna cause, addition of staff, increase in fees, for a variety of things. And so, you know, when the time comes to do that, it's something we wanna do. It's been a goal, but it's just, it's a, you know, it's a big change.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else? Anyone? Members of the audience? Don't want to make that mistake. Okay. Ordinance 19-23, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a one-year agreement with Sunday Creek Horizons, a consulting firm, introduced by Councilmember Grace.
Thank you again. And we are moving away from zoning changes. And this ordinance authorizes a new contract with Sunday Creek Horizons. And attached to the ordinance is a copy of that, the consultant master services agreement that spells out the scope of service, the term, and terms for termination and compliance, non-discrimination. So a fairly thorough master services agreement between the City of Athens and Sunday Creek Horizons. But this ordinance reads that the 2023 appropriation ordinance is hereby amended by appropriating from the unappropriated balance the sum of $90,000 to the general fund, and that the mayor is authorized to expend up to the $90,000, and that would cover the cost for this contract with Sunday Creek Horizons. And the section 1 is probably a better introduction. The mayor is hereby authorized to enter into a one-year agreement with Sunday Creek Horizons, a consulting firm that would include 2023 planning, project management, economic development, advocacy, and government relations services, and will continue to provide work on a remote work system at the Armory. So those are the big picture terms for the work, and then more details of that are included in the agreement.
Discussion? Member Swank?
I think I recall at the committee meeting, we had talked about periodic reporting from this group as to their progress. I have to admit, I haven't read every sentence of this yet. Is that in here somewhere?
No.
What would it take to add that?
That wouldn't be difficult to add. Referring over to.
Certainly don't need it monthly, but it'd be nice to get a 6-month checkup as to, you know, progress.
They'll do whatever I tell them. So if that's something that you want, I absolutely will make them come. I'll make them come weekly.
No.
No, I can do that at a regular interval if that's what you'd like.
I'd like to see that if it's not too much trouble to add that without
absolutely.
restarting the process.
Actually, I spoke with an individual from Sunday Creek who expressed an interest in working specifically with Member McCary to talk about alignment with our comprehensive plan, and also stated his willingness to appear before council to provide us with updates. And I believe is likely to show up at one of the readings of this ordinance as well.
Member Crowe?
I would just advise council to read section 10. Doesn't really specifically say that they will have reports on any sort of set schedule, but it does say at the owner's request, the consultant shall promptly deliver such items to the owner. So there's a whole series there of printed, plotted, or hard copies of material that they prepare. But we can get more specific, as Member Swank points out.
I think that covers it, yeah.
Well, actually, that's if there's a termination of the agreement. So we can actually add, I don't think it'll be too difficult to add a reporting. But that's if there's a termination of the agreement, then the ownership of the property involved.
And to take it a step further, what this document that you're reviewing is our typical front-end document that we use for engineers and architects. and we've modified it for general consulting services. And so, up until today, we were working on particular language in here. There is a proposal that I thought I submitted, but I clearly must have failed to do so, that also is attached to this. So basically, the proposal is the definitive scope, and it is an attachment to this front-end document. And so I will ensure that that gets to you as well. It's not a long, extensive number of pages, but it really defines the nature of the work. And then just kind of the interaction are governed by this front end document that we use for all of our professional services agreements.
Discussion, any more? Council? Members of the public? Okay. Well, let's move on to announcements and other business. We have 3 items here of reappointments and appointments to various boards and commissions. The first one is confirm the mayor's reappointment to the Board of Zoning Appeal. Hand that off to Member Grace.
Thank you again, President Pro Tem Reisner. And yes, we have been asked to confirm the reappointment of Aaron Thomas to a 3-year term to serve as an alternate on the Zoning Appeals Board.
Any discussion about this
I'd like
reappointment?
to make a motion that we approve.
No, very good.
Second.
Do we have a second? Great. Okay. Any discussion? And okay, we'll go to a vote. All those in favor of this reappointment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. The next is confirm the mayor's appointment to the Commission on Disabilities, and I'll hand that over to Member Ziff.
Thank you, President Pro Tem Reisner. I love saying that every time.
Me
It
too.
rolls right off the tongue.
Love hearing it.
Yeah. This is just to confirm the mayor's appointments to the Disabilities Commission. One of the names we're already fairly familiar with. It's Diane Bouvier. She has been the mayor's designee for a period of time now, but is being switched over to being a regular member because Lacey Rogers is now the mayor's designee for that, as well as Annie Betty Corpy. And if you have any questions about her credentials and willingness to do good for the people of Athens, we have her application on our drive, and I think it speaks quite highly of her. So I'd like to make a motion that we confirm these appointments.
Second.
Second, great.
So,
Any discussion necessary?
I just want to mention that I spoke with Diane, well, we texted actually, with Diane, and I asked her how she felt about this, and she was very supportive. And I trust Diane implicitly, so I'm definitely in favor of this appointment.
I would hope she wouldn't want to do this if she didn't want to do this. Really don't want it, but okay.
Okay, so we've had a motion and a second. All those in favor of the appointment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. And the last one is confirm the mayor's appointments to the Recreation Advisory Board. I'll hand that over to Member Alan Swank.
The Rec Advisory Board has solicited and accepted applications for the 2 open positions on the Rec Advisory Board and has made their recommendation to the mayor. The mayor, in turn, has put forth these 2 names for our consideration tonight. The first is Annie Vallant. Annie's been in Athens about 9 years. She's in the Sports Administration Department, and she's also the Executive Director of the Copperheads baseball team. Brings a dimension to the board that we don't have at this point in time. The second is Stuart Goldsberry. Stuart's lifelong Athens resident, Athens High grad, local business person, came up through the Parks and Recreation sports programs, and it gives us another, a bit of history in terms of the city in that program. I would move that we accept the mayor's appointment of Annie Vallant and Stuart Goldsberry to the Recreation Advisory Board. And by the way, this for the first time in 8 months gives us the full 7 people on the board.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We've had a motion and a second. Any more discussion? Audience, okay. We'll have the vote. All those in favor of the appointments signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. So moved and passed. Next, opportunities for citizens to speak on legislative items and city services not covered on the agenda. Okay, folks out there. Anything? No one's hiding behind the dais? Okay. All righty. In that case, I'd like to call for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We've had a motion and a second. All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay.